Karen Morris didn't know the man sitting at the far table was the exiled Lycan Prince. She didn't know he'd been hunting for her across the borderlands for months, trying to decide if her chronovision was the key to clearing his name or just another tavern rumor. And she certainly didn't know that pouring him one last drink would shatter the quiet, invisible life she had built to protect herself. All she knew was that if she didn't finish scrubbing the lye from the floorboards in the next 10 minutes, her boss would dock her pay again, and she was already 2 weeks behind on rent. Before we get into the story, take a second to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know if this story reaches Canada, the United States, Australia, Africa, or the United Kingdom. Let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. The last of the rowdy miners had stumbled out an hour ago, leaving behind the sour scent of spilled ale and the cold draft of the border winter. Karen worked with a mechanical, bone-weary efficiency, her hands raw and her mind focused on the simple, physical task of survival. The Gilded Claw was a drafty stone building wedged against a soot-stained smithy, but it was the only home she had. She knew every creak in the stairs and every place where the echoes of the past lingered in the wood, ghostly images of old fights and secrets she worked hard to ignore. She was wringing out her wet rag when she heard it. The low, heavy scrape of wood against stone. Karen's head snapped up, her heart hammering against her ribs. The corner booth, which she had scrubbed and turned over minutes ago, was occupied. A man sat in the deep shadows, his massive frame draped in heavy leathers and furs, his presence feeling like a physical weight against her chest. He was so still he might have been a trick of the guttering candlelight if not for his eyes. Even from across the room, they caught the dying orange glow of the hearth, reflecting it back with a piercing, predatory amber light that marked him as something far more than human. Her pulse kicked up. She had bolted the door herself, which meant he had been sitting there in the silence the entire time she worked. Karen's survival instincts screamed at her to grab the iron poker from the hearth and run. Instead, she heard herself say, "We're closed." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The man didn't move, but his voice rolled across the empty room like distant thunder. "One last drink. The door's right behind you." Karen kept her grip tight on the rag, her only weapon. "Use it." "I heard what you said." He leaned forward slightly, and the firelight finally caught the sharp planes of his face. Wild black hair fell past his shoulders, streaked with bronze. His jaw was dark with several days' beard, and old scars traced white lines across his left cheekbone. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, burning amber, carrying a grief so raw it felt obscene to witness. "Please." That single word, spoken like it cost him something vital, made her hesitate. There was no threat in it. Just exhaustion wrapped in iron control. "What are you drinking?" The question left her mouth before her brain could stop it. "Whiskey. Whatever you have." Karen moved behind the bar, hyper-aware of his gaze tracking her movements. Her hands were steady as she poured from the cheap bottle they kept for miners. When she set the glass on his table, he wrapped scarred fingers around it, but didn't drink. Just held it, staring into the amber liquid like it held answers. She should have walked away. Should have left him to his drink and locked herself in the storage room until he left. Instead, she heard herself ask, "How long have you been watching me?" His eyes lifted to hers, and the weight of his stare made her chest tighten. 3 months. Give or take. Ice flooded her veins. "Why?" "Because I've been searching the borderlands for someone with your gift." He set down the glass with deliberate care. "The ability to see the past of any room you stand in. They call it chronovision in the old texts. Rare as dragon's blood and twice as dangerous to the person who has it." Karen's mouth went dry. She'd spent 8 years hiding what she could do, ever since the night she'd witnessed her family's betrayal in the echoes and been too paralyzed by fear to stop it. No one knew. No one could know. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." His voice was certain, not cruel. "You see the imprints. The shadows of what happened before." I've watched you flinch away from certain corners of this room. Watched you avoid touching the walls near the stairs. You know what happened there, and it haunts you." Her hands started shaking. "Who are you?" "My name is Jules Rayleigh." He stood slowly, and she realized just how large he was, easily 6.5 feet of solid muscle barely contained by battle-scarred leather. 3 months ago, my father, the great alpha of the Northern Territories, was murdered in his own throne room. They found me standing over his body with his blood on my hands, and my brother had me declared a king killer before my father's corpse was cold. Karen backed toward the bar. "I heard about that. They say you did it. That you wanted the throne. They're wrong." The words came out like gravel. "I was framed. Someone used dark magic to cloud my memory, to make me appear guilty. My brother Cyrus took the crown within a week, and the high priest who investigated the murder had me exiled under threat of execution." His amber eyes burned into hers. "But I know the truth now. I know who really killed my father, and I know why. What I don't have is proof." "What does that have to do with me?" "Because you can see the past." Jules took a single step forward, and she felt the predatory power radiating from him like heat from a forge. "You can stand in that throne room and witness what really happened the night my father died. You're the only person in all the territories who can prove I'm innocent." "I'm not getting involved in Lycan politics," Karen said quickly. "I'm sorry about your father, but I can't help you. Can't or won't." His voice dropped to something almost gentle. "How long do you think you can hide here, Karen Morris? The High Priest knows about gifts like yours. He's been systematically hunting down anyone who might threaten his power. If I found you after 3 months of searching, how long before he does?" The question landed like a blade between her ribs. She'd always known her gift made her a target. Had spent years running from that truth. "Why should I trust you?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "You could be lying. You could be the killer." Jules reached into his coat and withdrew something small wrapped in dark cloth. When he unfolded it, she saw a ring, heavy gold with a crest she recognized even from across the room. The Great Alpha's sigil. "This was my father's." His voice cracked slightly. "He wore it every day of his life. The night he died, he pressed it into my hand and told me to run. Those were his last words to me. Run and find the truth. I've been running for 3 months and I'm tired of it. I want to go home. I want to clear my name. And I want the bastard who killed my father to pay for what he's done." Karen stared at the ring, at the grief etched into every line of Jules's face, and felt something crack open in her chest. She'd spent 8 years as a ghost, watching the past, but never participating in the present. Hiding from her gift because she was terrified of what it might cost her. But looking at Jules Rayleigh, at the desperate hope barely contained beneath his warrior's facade, she realized she was more terrified of spending the rest of her life scrubbing floors and pretending to be invisible. 10 days, she heard herself say. "I'll give you 10 days to get me to the capital and back. After that, I'm done." Jules's expression transformed, relief flooding his features like dawn breaking. "You have my word. 10 days, and then you're free." Karen didn't know if she believed him. Didn't know if she was making the worst mistake of her life or the first real choice she'd made in 8 years. All she knew was that tomorrow, she'd stop running from what she was. And pray she survived it. Jules extended his hand across the scarred table. "We should seal it. A blood oath, so you know I mean what I say." Karen stared at his outstretched palm, her heart hammering. She'd heard of blood oaths, ancient Lycan magic that bound both parties to their word. Breaking one meant death, slow and agonizing, as the magic consumed you from the inside out. "That's not necessary," she said, even as part of her knew it was the only way she'd truly trust him. "It is." Jules pulled a knife from his belt, the blade etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the firelight. "You need to know I won't betray you. That when I say 10 days and then freedom, I mean it." Without hesitation, he drew the blade across his palm. Blood welled up, dark and viscous in the dim light. Karen's breath caught. The finality of it hit her like a physical blow. If she did this, there was no going back. No changing her mind in the morning when fear caught up with her common sense. She held out her hand. Jules passed her the knife, and she made a shallow cut across her own palm, hissing at the sharp sting. When she looked up, his amber eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Repeat after me," he said quietly. "I bind myself to this oath, witnessed by the moon and stars." "I bind myself to this oath, witnessed by the moon and stars," Karen echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I have promised, I will fulfill. What I have sworn, I will honor." She repeated the words, feeling something shift in the air around them, like the moment before a storm breaks. Jules reached across the table and pressed his bleeding palm to hers. The world exploded. Karen gasped as power slammed into her chest, knocking the breath from her lungs. It wasn't the familiar cold touch of her chronovision activating. This was heat, raw and primal, flooding through her veins like liquid fire. The dingy tavern dissolved around her, replaced by cascading images that weren't past or present, but something else entirely, something that felt like destiny made manifest. She saw Jules as a boy, no more than 10, standing before his father with tears streaming down his face as he swore to protect his pack, to put their needs above his own. Saw him at 15, taking a blade meant for his younger brother during a border skirmish, the scars still visible on his ribs. Saw him at 20, arguing with his father about mercy for prisoners when the council wanted executions, his voice steady even as he stood alone against a room full of warriors. Saw him the night of the murder, his father pressing the ring into his hand, blood bubbling from the great Alpha's lips as he gasped, "The priest, don't trust," before the life left his eyes. And beneath it all, she felt his truth. Not witnessed through her gift, but experienced through something deeper, more fundamental. His honor wasn't performance or pretense. It was woven into the fabric of who he was, as essential as breath. He would die before breaking his word. Would burn the world down to protect those he'd sworn to keep safe. The vision shifted, and suddenly she was seeing herself through his eyes. Not the exhausted barmaid with raw hands and a haunted expression, but something else entirely. A woman with power thrumming beneath her skin, eyes that held the weight of history, a spine made of steel even when she was terrified. He saw her as extraordinary, and the conviction in that perception stole what was left of her breath. The images shattered, and Karen found herself back in the gilded claw, her hand still pressed to Jules's, both of them frozen in shock. "What was that?" she whispered, though part of her already knew. Jules's face had gone pale beneath his tan, his amber eyes wide with something between wonder and horror. "The moon bond." His voice was rough, shaken. "You're my fated mate." Karen jerked her hand back like she'd been burned, but the connection didn't break. She could still feel him, a warm presence at the edge of her consciousness, as intimate as her own heartbeat. "That's not possible. Those are stories. Legends." "I thought so too." Jules flexed his hand, staring at his palm like it belonged to someone else. "But I felt it. Felt you." He looked up, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. "You saw it too, didn't you?" "My memories. My truth." She had. Not through her chronovision, which showed her the past of places, but through something else entirely. The bond had let her see into his soul, and what she'd found there was a man who'd been telling the truth. Who was honorable to his core, even when it cost him everything. "I saw," she admitted quietly. "Then you know I didn't kill my father. You know I'm not lying about what happened." Karen wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process what had just occurred. The bond was still there, humming beneath her skin like a second pulse. She could feel Jules's presence, his determination, his desperate hope. And underneath it all, something else, a pull, magnetic and undeniable, drawing her toward him like gravity. "The bond doesn't change the deal," Jules said, his voice careful. 10 days. Then you're free to walk away from all of this. From me." He swallowed hard. The bond doesn't mean you owe me anything beyond what we agreed. Karen looked at him, at the way he was holding himself so carefully still, giving her space even though she could feel through the connection how much he wanted to reach for her. He was offering her a choice, even now. Even with fate itself trying to push them together. That, more than anything, made up her mind. "We leave at dawn," she said. "And you're going to tell me everything about who really killed your father and why." Jules's relief was palpable, flooding through the bond like warm honey. "Everything. I promise." Karen nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could still feel the echo of his memories, the weight of his honor. For the first time in 8 years, she wasn't watching history unfold from the shadows. She was about to step into it. And the moon bond burning beneath her skin told her there was no going back. They made it 6 miles before the Black Claw found them. Karen heard the wolves first, not the howling, but the sudden, unnatural silence that fell over the forest like a burial shroud. Every cricket, every night bird, every rustling creature went quiet at once, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. "Jules," she whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm. He was already moving, pulling her off the narrow game trail and into the deeper shadows beneath an overhang of ancient pines. His body was tense, predatory, and through the bond she felt his focus sharpen to a killing edge. "How many?" she breathed. 4. Maybe 5. His eyes had gone full amber, glowing faintly in the darkness. "Mercenaries. The priest must have sent them the moment we left the borderlands." Karen's pulse hammered against her throat. She'd known there would be danger, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different things. "What do we do?" "You run." Jules pressed something cold and heavy into her hand, a knife, smaller than his, but wickedly sharp. "Follow the stream east for 2 miles. There's an old hunter's cabin. Wait for me there." "What?" "No, I'm not leaving you two. Karen." He gripped her shoulders, his amber eyes burning into hers. "I can't fight and protect you at the same time. I need you safe so I can do what I do best." Through the bond, she felt his certainty, his absolute conviction that he could handle this. But she also felt something else, a thread of fear, not for himself, but for her. 10 days, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You promised me 10 days. His mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "And I keep my promises." Then the first hunter burst through the tree line, and Jules shoved her toward the stream. Karen ran. She crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at her face and arms, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard the sounds of combat, snarls, screams, the wet crunch of bone breaking. Every instinct screamed at her to look back, to help, but Jules had been right. She'd only be a liability in a fight between Lycans. The stream appeared suddenly, a ribbon of silver cutting through the darkness. She followed it east, her boots slipping on moss-covered stones, her lungs burning. The cabin materialized like a ghost, half-collapsed, its roof sagging, but still standing. Karen burst through the door and immediately pressed her back against the far wall, knife clutched in her shaking hand. She could still feel Jules through the bond, a bright thread of consciousness at the edge of her mind. He was alive. Fighting. Winning. Then the thread flickered and pain lanced through her chest. She gasped, doubling over. Through the bond, she felt his agony, claws raking across his ribs, teeth sinking into his shoulder. He was hurt. Badly. Karen's chronovision flared to life unbidden, and suddenly she was seeing the cabin's past. A hunter, years ago, hiding weapons beneath the floorboards. She dropped to her knees, scrabbling at the warped wood until she found the loose board. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a crossbow and a quiver of silver-tipped bolts. She didn't think. Didn't let herself hesitate. She grabbed the crossbow and ran back into the forest. The fight was brutal and bloody when she found it. Jules, in his Lycan form, a massive creature of fur and muscle and lethal grace, was surrounded by 3 mercenaries. One was already dead, its throat torn out. But Jules was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his movements slower than they should be. Karen raised the crossbow with trembling hands. She'd never fired one before, but desperation made her steady. She sighted down the bolt at the nearest hunter, a scarred brute circling behind Jules for a killing strike. She pulled the trigger. The bolt took him in the spine, and he went down screaming. Jules used the distraction to tear out the throat of the second hunter. The third, seeing his companions fall, turned to run. Jules let him go. The massive Lycan turned to Karen, amber eyes wide with shock. Through the bond, she felt his surprise, his gratitude, and underneath it all, something warmer. Pride. He shifted back to human form, his body sheened with sweat and blood, his breath coming in harsh gasps. You were supposed to run. I did run. Karen lowered the crossbow, her hands still shaking. Then I came back. Jules crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her against his chest, his heart hammering against her ear. You could have been killed. So could you. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. We're in this together now. Whether you like it or not. Through the bond, she felt his emotions warring fear for her safety, frustration at her recklessness, and beneath it all, something fierce and possessive that made her breath catch. Together, he repeated quietly, like he was testing the weight of the word. Karen nodded, and for the first time since this started, she felt something other than fear. She felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Jules pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. Thank you. She didn't have words for what she was feeling, so she just held on to him as the adrenaline drained away and left her shaking. They'd survived the first hunt. But through the bond, they both knew it wouldn't be the last. The Lycan capital rose from the northern plains like a predator's skull, all pale stone and sharp angles, its towers crowned with the bleached bones of ancient enemies. Karen had heard stories about the city her entire life, whispered tales of its brutality and dark beauty, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. Stay close, Jules murmured, his hand settling at the small of her back. And keep your eyes down. Servants don't make eye contact. Karen adjusted the rough gray cloak they'd stolen from a farmhouse 2 days ago, trying to ignore how the coarse fabric scratched against her skin. Jules had cut his wild hair short and shaved his beard, transforming himself from exiled prince to anonymous laborer. The change was so complete it unsettled her, only his amber eyes remained the same, though he kept them carefully hooded. They joined the line of workers filing through the servants' gate, a narrow opening in the massive wall that encircled the city. Karen kept her head down, counting her breaths, trying to calm the panic clawing at her throat. Through the bond, she felt Jules's forced calm, his iron control masking the tension coiled in his muscles. A guard stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crowd with bored efficiency. Papers. Jules handed over the forged documents they'd purchased from a black market contact in the border towns. Karen held her breath as the guard examined them, his scarred fingers tracing the ink. Kitchen workers, the guard grunted. They're short-staffed at the palace. Report to the head cook before sunset. He waved them through without a second glance. Karen exhaled slowly as they passed beneath the gate's shadow. The moment they entered the city proper, the atmosphere changed. It pressed down on her like a physical weight, fear and suspicion so thick she could taste it on her tongue. The streets were crowded but eerily quiet. People moved with hurried purpose, their conversations conducted in hushed whispers. Lycan guards stood at every corner, their amber eyes tracking the citizens with predatory focus. Wanted posters plastered every wall, and Karen's stomach clenched when she recognized Jules's face staring back at her, younger, bearded, with a bounty that could buy a small estate. King Killer, someone spat as they passed a group of men gathered near a fountain. Should have torn him apart when they had the chance. Jules's hand tightened on her back, but he kept walking, his expression carefully neutral. Through the bond, Karen felt his rage, his grief, his overwhelming need to scream the truth at these people who believed the lies. They moved deeper into the city, past markets where vendors sold meat and bone jewelry, past fighting pits where Lycan sparred for entertainment, past temples where the faithful burned offerings to the moon. Everything was built from the same pale stone, giving the entire city a skeletal quality that made Karen's skin crawl. Her chronovision flickered at the edges of her consciousness, trying to activate. The city was ancient, steeped in centuries of violence and power. Every stone whispered with echoes of the past, battles fought, treaties broken, blood spilled. She forced the visions down, afraid of what she might see, afraid of losing herself in the weight of history pressing against her gift. "There," Jules said quietly, nodding toward a massive structure that dominated the city's center. The palace was carved from black stone, its spires reaching toward the sky like clawed fingers. Even from a distance, Karen could feel the wrongness radiating from it, corruption that had seeped into the very foundations. "That's where your father died," she whispered. "Yes." Jules's voice was flat, emotionless, but through the bond she felt everything he was holding back. "The throne room is on the 3rd level, eastern wing. That's where we need to get you." Karen stared at the palace, at the guards patrolling its walls, at the gallows erected in the courtyard where 3 bodies swung from ropes, a warning to anyone who might oppose the new regime. "Jules," she said quietly, "what happened here after your father died? This doesn't feel like a normal succession. This feels like occupation." "Because it is." His jaw clenched. "My brother Cyrus was always ambitious, but he was never cruel. Never this." He gestured at the gallows, at the fear-stricken citizens. "The high priest got his claws into him somehow. Twisted him. Or replaced him entirely, I can't tell which." They turned down a side street, heading toward the palace's service entrance. The buildings here were older, meaner, built too close together. Karen's gift flared again, and she caught fragments of memories, screams, recent ones, coming from the buildings flanking the palace. Interrogation rooms. Torture chambers. Places where people who asked too many questions went to disappear. "He's killing anyone who might have been loyal to your father," Karen said, nausea rising in her throat. "Systematically." "I know." Jules's voice was rough with barely contained fury. "Which is why we have to move fast. Get you into the throne room, let you witness what really happened, and get out before the priest realizes we're here." Karen wanted to argue, to tell him this was suicide, that they should run while they still could. But through the bond, she felt his determination, his absolute refusal to let his father's murderer continue wearing the mask of righteousness. And she realized she couldn't walk away either. Not from him. Not from this. They approached the palace's servant entrance, where a line of workers waited to be processed. Karen pulled her cloak tighter, trying to make herself small, invisible. She'd spent 8 years perfecting the art of being overlooked. Now she needed that skill more than ever. Because somewhere in that black stone palace, the high priest was waiting. And if he discovered Jules Rayleigh had returned, they'd both end up swinging from those gallows before sunset. Jules squeezed her hand once, brief and reassuring, before they stepped into line. The hunt had brought them to the wolf's den. Now they just had to survive it. They waited 3 days for the opportunity. 3 days of scrubbing floors and hauling water, keeping their heads down while palace guards prowled the corridors. 3 days of listening to servants whisper about the new Alpha King's paranoia, about people vanishing in the night, about the high priest's growing power. 3 days of feeling Jules's frustration through the bond, his desperation to act warring with the need for caution. Finally, on the 3rd night, the head cook sent Karen to polish the silver in the eastern wing. "Throne room needs cleaning before tomorrow's council session," the woman grunted, shoving a bucket of supplies into Karen's arms. "High priest wants everything spotless. Don't touch nothing you shouldn't, and don't linger." Karen kept her expression neutral as she climbed the servants' stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jules was in the kitchens, creating a distraction by accidentally starting a grease fire. She had maybe 20 minutes before someone noticed she wasn't where she was supposed to be. The throne room doors were massive slabs of black oak carved with scenes of conquest. Karen pushed through them and stopped, her breath catching. The room was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows. Moonlight streamed through high windows, illuminating a floor of polished stone that reflected like dark water. At the far end, elevated on a dais, sat two thrones, one larger, ornate, draped in furs. The other, slightly smaller, stood empty beside it. Karen's chronovision flared to life the moment she crossed the threshold. The room's past slammed into her with brutal force. She gasped, dropping the bucket, her knees buckling as centuries of history tried to flood her consciousness all at once. Coronations, executions, treaties signed in blood, the throne room had witnessed it all, and every moment was screaming to be seen. She forced herself to focus, to narrow her gift's scope. 3 months ago, she whispered, her voice shaking. Show me 3 months ago. The present dissolved like smoke. Suddenly the throne room was alive with people. Karen stood invisible among them, a ghost witnessing history. The great Alpha sat on his throne, a massive man with Jules's amber eyes and a presence that filled the room like thunder. Counselors flanked him, their expressions grave. And standing at the Alpha's right hand, draped in ceremonial robes, was the high priest. Karen had seen his face on propaganda posters plastered throughout the city, a thin man with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. But here, in the memory, she could see what the posters didn't show. The hunger in his expression. The way his fingers twitched as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The border raids must be addressed, my king, the priest said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. Your son Jules recommends mercy, but I counsel strength. These wolves respect only power. The great Alpha leaned forward, his expression troubled. Jules has negotiated peace before. His instincts are soft. The priest's interruption was subtle, respectful, but Karen caught the edge beneath it. With respect, my king, your eldest son's compassion will be the death of us all. The Alpha's eyes narrowed. Careful, priest. You speak of my heir. Something flickered across the priest's face, there and gone so fast Karen almost missed it. Rage. Pure, incandescent rage, quickly masked behind a veneer of humility. Forgive me, my king. I speak only out of concern for our people. The memory blurred, time accelerating. Karen watched as the counselors filed out, as the guards changed shifts, as the throne room emptied until only the great Alpha and the high priest remained. You wanted to speak privately, the Alpha said, standing from his throne. What troubles you, old friend? The priest moved closer, his hands hidden within his robes. I have served your family for 30 years. Watched your sons grow. Guided your decisions. His voice had changed, gone cold and sharp. And I have waited long enough. The Alpha's expression shifted, suspicion dawning. What are you? The priest's hand shot out, and shadows erupted from his palm like living things. They wrapped around the great Alpha's throat, squeezing, suffocating. The king clawed at his neck, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal, but the shadows only tightened. Karen watched in horror as the Alpha fell to his knees, blood vessels bursting in his eyes, his mouth opening in a silent scream. You should have chosen me, the priest hissed, kneeling beside the dying king. Should have seen that your sons were weak, that I was the one worthy of ruling. But you were blind. Sentimental. So I will take what should have been mine. The throne room doors burst open, and Jules stumbled through, younger, his face contorted with confusion. Karen realized with sick certainty that this was the moment, the memory that had been stolen from him. Father. Jules's voice cracked. The priest's shadows released the Alpha, and the king collapsed. In the same instant, the priest sliced his own palm and smeared blood across Jules's hands, his clothes. More shadows poured from the priest, wrapping around Jules's head, and Karen watched as Jules's expression went blank, his amber eyes glazing over. Guards, the priest screamed, and suddenly the room was full of armored Lycans. The prince has murdered his father. Seize him. The guards hesitated, seeing Jules standing over the alpha's body, blood on his hands, his face slack with shock. Through the memory, Karen felt Jules's confusion, his desperate attempt to understand what had happened, why he couldn't remember the last 5 minutes. Take him, the priest commanded, and send for Prince Cyrus. Tell him his brother has committed treason. The memory shattered, and Karen found herself back in the present, on her hands and knees, gasping for air. Tears streamed down her face, grief for Jules, for his father, for the kingdom that had been stolen through murder and lies. She heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Karen scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking, and grabbed the bucket she'd dropped. She was wiping furiously at an already clean section of floor when 2 guards entered, their eyes suspicious. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning, sir," Karen said, keeping her voice meek, her eyes down. "Head cook's orders." The guards exchanged glances. One stepped closer, and Karen's heart seized. Through the bond, she felt Jules's alarm. He'd sensed her fear. "Finish and get out," the guard finally said. "This room is restricted." Karen nodded and worked faster, her mind racing. She'd seen it. All of it. The priest's dark magic, the murder, the way he'd framed Jules with shadow and blood. She had the truth. Now she just had to survive long enough to use it. Karen found Jules in the laundry quarters an hour later, her hands still trembling from what she'd witnessed. The moment their eyes met, he knew. "You saw it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it." Karen glanced around, but the other servants were focused on their work, too exhausted to care about whispered conversations. "The shadows. The way he framed you. Jules, he used necromancy, dark magic that's been forbidden for centuries. If we can prove that, we need evidence." Jules's jaw clenched. "Your testimony alone won't be enough. The council will say you're lying to protect me because of the bond. We need physical proof." "The archives," Karen said suddenly. "If the priest has been planning this for years, there would be records. Research on forbidden magic. Correspondence with dark practitioners. Something." Jules's eyes lit with grim understanding. "The palace archives are in the lower levels. Restricted access. Can you get us in?" "I know a way." He glanced at the other servants. "But we have to go now, while the guard shift changes. We might not get another chance." They slipped away during the evening meal chaos, moving through servant passages that Jules navigated from memory. The archives were buried deep beneath the palace, accessible only through a forgotten maintenance tunnel that reeked of mildew and centuries of neglect. The archive room itself was vast, lined floor to ceiling with shelves that disappeared into darkness. Dust hung thick in the air, undisturbed for what looked like years. Karen's chronovision flickered, showing her brief glimpses of scholars long dead, poring over ancient texts. "Look for anything related to shadow magic," Jules said, moving toward a section marked with symbols Karen didn't recognize. "Necromancy. Blood rituals. Anything the priest might have studied." They worked in tense silence, pulling down volumes, scanning pages by the light of a single stolen candle. Karen's fingers were black with dust when she finally found it, a journal bound in dark leather, its pages filled with meticulous handwriting. "Jules," she breathed. "I found something." He was at her side in an instant. Karen opened the journal, her hands shaking as she read aloud. Day 287. "The Alpha continues to reject my counsel. He favors his son's weakness over my strength." Day 301. "I have made contact with the Bone Witches. They will teach me what the old laws forbid." Day 315. "The shadow binding requires a sacrifice. The Alpha's blood will suffice." Jules's face had gone pale. "That's his handwriting." "The priest's." "This is." The archive door burst open with a deafening crash. Guards poured in, at least a dozen of them, with the high priest standing at their center. His ice-chip eyes gleamed with triumph as they fixed on Jules. "Did you really think you could return to my city without me knowing?" The priest's voice echoed off the stone walls. "I've had watchers on every gate for months, waiting for you to be foolish enough to come back." Jules shoved Karen behind him, his body already beginning to change. "Run," he growled. "There's nowhere to run, Prince." The priest smiled, cold and terrible. "The girl will die with you." "A shame. I could have used someone with her gift. But she's seen too much now." Karen clutched the journal to her chest as the guards advanced, weapons drawn. Through the bond, she felt Jules's rage exploding outward, his control finally shattering after months of restraint. "I said run," Jules snarled, and then he was shifting. The transformation was brutal and beautiful. Bones cracked and reformed, muscle tearing and reknitting as his body expanded. Fur erupted across his skin, black as midnight with streaks of bronze. In seconds, the man was gone, replaced by a massive Lycan that stood nearly 8 feet tall, all lethal muscle and bared fangs. Jules's roar shook dust from the ceiling. The first guard who rushed him died instantly, his throat torn out before he could raise his sword. The second lasted only marginally longer. Jules moved with terrifying speed, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, his amber eyes blazing with feral intelligence. "Kill them both," the priest screamed, his composure cracking. Karen pressed herself against the shelves as chaos erupted. Guards attacked from all sides, but Jules was unstoppable. He fought like he had nothing left to lose, like every wound his father had suffered was being avenged with each guard he cut down. But there were too many. Even as Jules fought, more guards poured through the door. A blade caught his shoulder, drawing blood. Another sliced across his ribs. He stumbled, and Karen felt his pain lance through the bond. She couldn't let him die protecting her. Not after everything. Karen's chronovision flared to life, and she saw it, a brief flash from decades past. This archive room, a scholar activating an emergency mechanism hidden behind a loose stone in the east wall. A tunnel that led to the lower city. "Jules," she screamed. "East wall, third stone from the floor. There's a passage." Jules's head whipped toward her, understanding flashing in his amber eyes. He barreled toward the wall, using his massive body to shield Karen as she dropped to her knees and frantically searched for the mechanism. Guards closed in, weapons raised. Her fingers found the loose stone and pressed. Something clicked deep within the wall, and a section of shelving swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. "Go!" Jules roared, his voice barely human. Karen dove through the opening. Jules followed, spinning at the last second to slash at the nearest guards. Then he grabbed the shelving and wrenched it closed with inhuman strength, the stone grinding back into place. They were in complete darkness, the sounds of the guards' fury muffled by thick stone. Jules shifted back to human form, his breathing ragged, blood dripping from multiple wounds. "Are you hurt?" His hands found her face in the darkness, checking for injuries. "I'm fine. You're the one who's. I'll heal." He pulled her close, his heart hammering against her ear. "Did you get the journal?" Karen's grip tightened on the leather-bound book, still clutched to her chest. "I have it. Then we have what we need." Jules's voice was grim. "Now we just have to stay alive long enough to use it." The tunnel led them to the lower city, emerging in a warren of abandoned buildings where the poorest citizens huddled against the winter cold. Jules found them shelter in a collapsed temple, its roof open to the stars, while Karen tended his wounds with strips torn from her shirt. "We can't hide forever," she said quietly, cleaning the gash across his ribs. Through the bond, she felt his pain, but also his determination. "The priest will tear this city apart looking for us." "I know." Jules caught her hand, his amber eyes fierce in the moonlight. "Which is why we're not hiding. Tomorrow, I'm invoking the trial of claws." Karen's breath caught. She'd heard of the ancient ritual, a fight to the death between two Lycans, witnessed by the clans, binding in its judgment. You're going to challenge Cyrus. Not Cyrus. The priest. Jules's voice was cold steel. He's the one who murdered my father. He's the one who deserves to answer for it. But the priest isn't alpha. He can't accept a challenge for the throne. No, Jules agreed. But I can force him to reveal himself. If I challenge Cyrus publicly, announce what the priest did, he'll have to respond. His pride won't let him hide behind my brother. He paused. And if Cyrus is still in there, still the brother I knew, maybe hearing the truth will break whatever hold the priest has on him. Karen studied the journal by moonlight, its pages filled with the priest's meticulous documentation of his crimes. This proves he studied necromancy. But it's not enough. The council will want physical evidence of the murder itself. What do you mean? I saw it in my vision. When the priest used shadow magic to kill your father, there was a moment where the shadows solidified, became almost physical. They left something behind. Karen closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember. A shard. Crystallized darkness lodged in your father's chest wound. The priest would have removed it before the body was examined, but he wouldn't have destroyed it. That kind of magic, it's too valuable. Too powerful. Jules's expression sharpened. Where would he keep it? Somewhere close. Somewhere he could access it easily. Karen's mind raced. The high priest has chambers in the temple district. Private rooms where he performs rituals. Then that's where we'll find it. Jules stood, his wounds already beginning to heal. But first, I need to send word to the loyalist clans. Let them know I'm alive and ready to reclaim what's mine. They spent the night moving through the shadows of the lower city, Jules making contact with old allies who had gone underground after his exile. By dawn, word was spreading the true heir had returned, and he was demanding justice. The challenge was issued at noon in the central square, where the largest crowd could witness it. Jules stood before the palace gates, his voice carrying across the stone plaza. I am Jules Rayleigh, firstborn son of the great Alpha, and I have been falsely accused of king-killing. I invoke the trial of claws and challenge any who claim I am guilty to face me in combat. The crowd murmured, shock rippling through them. Palace guards moved to arrest him, but Jules's supporters, more than Karen had expected, blocked their path. Let him speak, someone shouted. Others took up the cry. The palace doors opened, and Cyrus emerged. Karen's first glimpse of Jules's brother stole her breath. He looked like Jules, but younger, softer, with the same amber eyes that now held a glassy, distant quality. The priest's hand rested on his shoulder like a master controlling a puppet. You dare return? Cyrus's voice was hollow, emotionless. You, who murdered our father? I murdered no one. Jules's voice rang with conviction. Our father was killed by the man standing beside you. The high priest used shadow magic, necromancy, to murder the great Alpha and frame me for it. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. The priest's expression remained serene, but Karen caught the rage flickering in his ice-chip eyes. Lies, the priest said smoothly. The grief has driven him mad. Then accept my challenge. Jules's words were a blade. Prove my accusations false in combat, as the old laws demand. Or are you afraid to face me without your shadows to protect you? The crowd fell silent. Every eye turned to the priest. To refuse would be to admit cowardice, to accept guilt. To agree would mean facing Jules in his Lycan form before witnesses. The priest's smile was poisonous. Very well. I accept your challenge, Prince. Tonight, under the full moon, we will settle this. His gaze shifted to Karen, standing at the crowd's edge. And when I tear out your throat, your mate will watch. Before I kill her too. Jules snarled, but loyal clansmen held him back. The challenge was accepted. The trial would proceed. Karen met Jules's eyes across the plaza, and through the bond, she felt his fear, not for himself, but for her. She touched her chest, where the journal was hidden beneath her cloak, and mouthed two words. Trust me. Because while Jules fought for his throne, Karen would be breaking into the High Priest's chambers. She would find the blood shard, the physical proof of his crimes. She had 10 hours until moonrise. 10 hours to save a kingdom. The hunt had become a race, and only one of them would survive to see dawn. The temple district was nearly deserted as Karen slipped through its winding streets, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every Lycan in the capital was gathering at the arena for the trial of claws, leaving the priest's chambers vulnerable. She had maybe 2 hours before the duel began, 2 hours to find the blood shard and get to the arena before Jules faced the priest alone. The high priest's private temple was smaller than she'd expected, built from the same pale stone as the rest of the city, but marked with symbols that made her skin crawl. Her chronovision flickered as she approached, showing her glimpses of dark rituals performed in moonlight, of sacrifices made to powers that predated the Lycan clans. She picked the lock with trembling fingers, a skill learned during her years of survival in the borderlands, and slipped inside. The interior was sparse, almost monastic, except for the altar at its center. Black candles surrounded it, their wax pooled like congealed blood. And behind the altar, set into the wall, was a small iron box engraved with protective runes. Karen's gift screamed at her not to touch it, but she had no choice. She wrapped her hand in her cloak and lifted the box. The moment her fingers made contact, even through fabric, her chronovision exploded. She saw the priest immediately after the murder, carefully extracting the crystallized shadow from the great Alpha's chest wound. Saw him speaking incantations over it, binding it with his own blood. Saw him place it in this very box with reverence bordering on worship. Because if anyone ever discovers what I've done, the priest's voice echoed through the memory, this will be the evidence that condemns me. So I'll keep it close. Keep it safe. Keep it as a reminder of my power. The vision released her, and Karen staggered. Inside the box, wrapped in black silk, was the blood shard, a fragment of crystallized shadow the size of her thumb, still pulsing with malevolent energy. She'd found it. Karen ran. The arena was packed when she arrived, thousands of Lycans gathered in the ancient stone amphitheater. The crowd's roar was deafening as she pushed through, clutching the iron box to her chest. Through the bond, she felt Jules's awareness of her, his relief that she was alive warring with his fear for what was about to happen. She reached the arena floor just as the combatants entered from opposite gates. Jules strode forward in human form, bare-chested, wearing only leather trousers. Every scar he'd earned in service to his people was on display, a map of his honor written in flesh. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, remembering the prince they'd loved, while others jeered, believing the lies they'd been fed. The high priest entered draped in ceremonial robes, his thin face serene. But Karen saw what others missed, the way his fingers twitched, already calling shadows. The terms are set, the arena master announced, his voice magically amplified. Trial by combat. Lycan form. Fight until one yields or dies. The victor's truth becomes law. Jules began to shift, his body rippling with the transformation. But the priest moved faster than should have been possible, his robes falling away to reveal skin covered in necromantic tattoos that writhed like living things. Did you think I would fight fair? The priest's laugh was cruel. I've spent 30 years preparing for this moment. I will not lose to a whelp who thinks honor matters more than power. Shadows erupted from the priest's hands, the same darkness that had killed Jules's father. They shot toward Jules mid-transformation, wrapping around his throat, choking him. The crowd gasped in horror. Karen didn't think. She vaulted over the barrier separating spectators from combatants and ran onto the arena floor. Stop. Her voice cracked with desperation. He's using necromancy. Dark magic. He's breaking the sacred laws of combat. The priest's concentration broke for an instant, his shadows weakening. Jules completed his shift and tore free, his massive Lycan form stumbling backward as he gasped for air. The girl lies, the priest snarled. Seize her. But Karen was already opening the iron box. She held the blood shard high, and it caught the sunlight, pulsing with unnatural darkness that no one could deny. "This is the weapon he used to murder the Great Alpha." Karen's voice rang across the arena. "Crystallized shadow magic, extracted from the king's chest wound. I saw it in my vision, saw the priest use necromancy to kill Jules's father and frame him for the crime." The crowd erupted in chaos. Lycan elders in the front rows stood, their expressions horrified. Shadow magic had been forbidden for 3 centuries, its use punishable by death. "She's lying." The priest's composure finally shattered. "The bond has corrupted her mind. She'll say anything to save her mate." "Then explain the shard," Karen challenged, her voice steady despite her terror. "Explain why it's covered in your blood, bound with your magic. Explain why you kept it hidden in your private temple." One of the elders, a scarred woman with white fur, climbed down to the arena floor. She approached Karen slowly, her amber eyes grave, and held out her hand. Karen placed the shard in her palm. The elder's gift was different from Karen's. She could sense the magical signature embedded in objects. The moment she touched the blood shard, her expression transformed to one of absolute disgust. "Necromancy," she confirmed, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. "Bound with the priest's essence. This is his magic. His crime." She turned to face the priest, her eyes blazing. "You murdered the Great Alpha. You used forbidden arts to steal the throne." The priest's face contorted with rage. "I did what was necessary. The Alpha was weak. His sons were weaker. I should have ruled. I earned it through decades of service, and they denied me." His confession hung in the air like a death sentence. Jules stalked toward him, still in Lycan form, his amber eyes burning with righteous fury. The priest tried to summon his shadows again, but the elder crushed the blood shard in her fist, and the priest screamed as his connection to the dark magic severed. "The trial is over," the elder declared. "Jules Rayleigh is innocent. The high priest is condemned for king-killing, necromancy, and conspiracy against the throne." The crowd's roar was deafening. Jules shifted back to human form and looked at Karen across the blood-stained sand. Through the bond, she felt his overwhelming gratitude, his love, his awe at what she'd risked to save him. She'd stepped into history instead of just witnessing it. And she'd changed everything. The execution happened at sunset. Karen didn't watch. She'd seen enough death in her visions to last a lifetime, and she felt no need to witness the high priest's end, even knowing he deserved it. Instead, she stood in the palace gardens, staring at the city spread below like a promise finally kept. She felt it through the bond when the priest died, a sudden severing of dark energy, like a wound finally closing. Jules's grief and relief flooded through their connection, complex and raw. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring his father back. "It's done," Jules said quietly, materializing beside her. He'd changed into formal attire, deep blue leather embossed with his family crest, preparing for what came next. "The elders have called an emergency council. They're prepared to restore me to my rightful place." Karen turned to face him. In the dying light, he looked like the prince from her vision, honorable, fierce, carrying the weight of his responsibilities with dignity. But there was something new in his expression now. Peace, hard-won and fragile. "What about Cyrus?" she asked. "Is he alive?" Jules's joy tightened. The priest had him under a compulsion spell. Strong enough to control his actions, but not strong enough to completely erase who he was. "The elders are working to break it." He paused. He remembers fragments. Enough to know what he did while under the priest's influence. The guilt is destroying him. That's not his fault. "I know. But knowing and feeling are different things." Jules reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "He'll need time. We all will." The palace bells began to ring, their deep tones echoing across the capital. The sound was mournful and hopeful all at once, a city mourning its stolen years while celebrating its liberation. They're calling you, Karen said softly. Your people need their alpha. I need you with me. Jules cupped her face, his amber eyes intense. I know this isn't the life you chose. I know you agreed to 10 days, and I've already asked more of you than anyone should. But Karen, I can't do this without you. I don't want to. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt it building through every shared danger, every moment of trust, every time the bond hummed between them with certainty. The scared barmaid who'd scrubbed floors and hidden her gift was gone, burned away in the crucible of conspiracy and courage. I'm terrified, she admitted. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know court politics or diplomacy or any of the things you'll need from a mate. I don't need a politician. Jules's thumb brushed her cheekbone. I need someone who'll tell me the truth when everyone else is lying. Someone who'll stand beside me when it's dangerous, not behind me where it's safe. Someone who sees history and refuses to let it repeat itself. His voice dropped. I need you, Karen. Just as you are. Through the bond, she felt the truth of his words, the absolute conviction. He wasn't asking her to be something she wasn't. He was asking her to be exactly who she'd become. Yes, she whispered. I'll stay. His kiss was gentle and fierce all at once, tasting of relief and promise and a future neither of them had dared imagine a week ago. The coronation happened under the full moon, as tradition demanded. The arena had been transformed, its blood-stained sand covered with silk and surrounded by thousands of candles that turned the ancient space into something sacred. Every Lycan clan sent representatives, their eyes watchful but hopeful as Jules knelt before the elders. Karen stood among them, wearing deep green silk that made her hazel eyes luminous. She'd never owned anything so fine, had never imagined herself in a palace, watching a prince become king. The eldest placed the crown on Jules's head, not gold but silver, wrought in the shape of winter branches. Rise, Jules Rayleigh, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. May your reign bring justice and peace. Jules stood, and the crowd roared. But his eyes found Karen immediately, and she saw the vulnerability beneath his regal bearing. The fear that he might not be enough, that he might fail the people who'd lost so much. She stepped forward and took his hand, and through their bond, she poured everything she felt into him. Confidence. Faith. Love. You won't face this alone, she said, loud enough for the elders to hear. I claim my place as his mate, as witness to his truth, as the one who will stand beside him in darkness and light. The eldest smiled, ancient and knowing. Then come forward, Karen Morris. The moon bond has chosen you, and we recognize what fate has made clear. Karen knelt beside Jules as the elder traced symbols on their joined hands, speaking words in the old tongue. Magic flared between them, the bond that had sparked in a dingy tavern now sealed before witnesses, recognized by the laws that governed their world. When they stood as Alpha and his mate. As king and queen. The celebration lasted until dawn, but eventually Jules pulled Karen away to the palace balcony where they could watch the sun rise over their city. The capital looked different now, softer, hopeful, like it was finally remembering how to breathe. My father would have liked you, Jules said quietly. He always said the strongest rulers were the ones who remembered what it was like to be powerless. I'm still figuring out how not to be. Karen leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the pre-dawn chill. This gift I spent so long thinking it was a curse. Something that made me dangerous. Wrong. And now? Now I think maybe it's what I was always meant to use. Not to hide from history, but to make sure we learn from it. She looked up at him. Your father's murder won't be forgotten. The priest's betrayal won't be repeated. Because I'll make sure everyone remembers what happens when ambition poisons honor. Jules pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. We're going to make mistakes. Disappoint people. Face challenges I can't even imagine yet. I know. But we'll face them together. Yes, Karen agreed, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Together. She thought about the girl she'd been a week ago, invisible, afraid, resigned to a life of hiding. That girl would never have believed this was possible. Would never have imagined that pouring one last drink would lead to a crown and a kingdom and a love that felt like destiny finally fulfilled. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was Karen Morris, Queen of the Northern Territories, mate to the Alpha King, and witness to truth. She'd stepped out of the shadows and claimed her place in history. And she was finally, impossibly free. Before you go, where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts about Karen and Jules's journey in the comments below. Did the moonbond moment give you chills? What would you have done in Karen's place? Let's talk about it. And if you enjoyed this story of finding power in what makes you different, please hit that subscribe button. It helps more people discover these tales of courage, magic, and the kind of love that changes kingdoms. New stories every week. I can't wait to share the next one with you. Until then, may you find the courage to step out of the shadows and claim your own destiny.